Well, I think it's interesting, the science and youth ministry conversation, because it's the conversation that I was formed in as a teenager, ultimately, but in a very different way than I think often we conceive science and youth ministry currently. My experience was growing up in a conservative environment in which attending creationist events was actually a big part of what it meant to be a Christian. I went to some Christian music concerts and did Bible quizzing and memorized scripture, and went to creationist conferences often. And so for me, Ken Ham was one of the superstars of the creationist movement. And I remember going and getting to meet Henry Morris and Dwayne Gish, and eventually Ken Ham, and him signing my copy of The Lie, Evolution, his kind of paramount book at the time. And that was a huge part of growing up, to the degree that I spent my 8th grade persuasive speech. Everybody does one of these 8th grade 4-minute persuasive speeches. I spent 20 minutes with 40 note cards, boring my class to death, trying to refute evolution, basically, and trying to bring people to this belief in a literal creation as described in Genesis. And that was really the heart of what was, for me, part of growing up, was trying to prove that Genesis described well the unfolding of the universe into the world that we know, and that it was literal and accurate, and that was a big part of my faith at the time. The problem, I guess, that I have encountered as I have continued through life, on to ultimately being a philosophy major and a youth pastor for many years, and then ultimately going off to a theological seminary, and now I teach youth ministry and young adult ministry from a practical theological perspective in a theological seminary. The problem that I encountered for my own formation was that although the doctrine of creation was held up as this important piece to the puzzle of my faith, I missed the deeper meaning of the doctrine of creation amidst all of this banter, amidst all of this refutation of other ways of looking at the world. I missed the deeper meaning of what the doctrine of creation can and should ultimately orient us to do. I was told that creation was about understanding how the world came to be, not what kind of universe ultimately we find ourselves in. And I think that's the real deeper meaning of a doctrine of creation from a Christian historical standpoint. When you look at the history of Christian theology over 2,000 years, the deeper meaning of that creation narrative is in rooting us in a universe in which there is a God who is created, there's a God who is created purposefully and intently, and there's a God who is created purposefully and intently out of a place of love, out of a place of care and kindness, out of a place of revealing God's own self in the midst of that. And then maybe most importantly, that we're called to cooperate with, or to bring forth goodness and truth and beauty out of a universe that has been tilted in such a way that those things are possible, because we've been created in a universe that is created by a God of goodness and truth and beauty. All of that was lost on me growing up in this kind of creationist moment or movement, in which creation was bantered about endlessly, and the importance of creation as a literal concept, but not as a grounding for my own identity and my own understanding and way of looking at the world. And when we understand the doctrine of creation, I think, as grounding our ability to look at the world around us and to see the possibility of goodness, truth, and beauty coming forth from the world in which we find ourselves. When we are grounded in that way, it influences how we live in the world, it influences how we understand who we are in the world, and it influences how we understand God's work and action in the world. And I think that the tragedy of a lot of the creationist kinds of ideas that are floating out in Christianity, I think the tragedy is that amidst the discussion of creation, we miss the purpose of that discussion, the purpose of that doctrine. The doctrine itself has the very life ripped out of it, and it's replaced with nothing but concern for the literal reading of what's happening there.